Welcome to The Hidden Verdict, the channel where every case pulls you further into the unknown. Hit subscribe and step with us into the darkest corners of the human mind.
Truth be told, I'm unable to come up with anything redeeming about Mr. Kohberger because his grotesque acts of evil have buried and hidden anything that might have been good or intrinsically human about him. His actions have made him the worst of the worst. Even in pleading guilty, he is giving nothing hinting of remorse or redemption, nothing suggesting even a recognition or understanding, let alone regret for the pain that he has caused. And therefore I will not attempt to speak about him further, other than to simply sentence him so that he is forever removed from civilized society. All right, Mr. Kohberger, you have an opportunity to make a statement if you wish to. I take it you are declining.
I respectfully decline.
Well,
It started as a quiet college town where doors were rarely locked and weekends blurred into one another. Then, in the early hours of a November morning, that illusion shattered. For students were found dead inside a house that was supposed to be safe, a place filled with laughter just hours before. By sunrise, fear had settled into the streets of Moscow, Idaho, heavy and suffocating. Parents called their children. Students slept with lights on. And a question echoed everywhere: who could do something like this? At first, there was no face to blame, only rumors, theories, and the unbearable weight of not knowing. The crime felt chaotic, almost unreal, yet disturbingly precise. Whoever entered that house didn't act blindly. There was intention in every movement, silence in every step. As days passed, investigators worked quietly, while the public searched desperately for meaning in fragments of information. Then a name began to surface. Bryan Kohberger. A man who didn't fit the image people expected. Not a drifter. Not a stranger passing through. He was a criminology student, someone who studied crime, behavior, and the minds of killers. Someone who understood how investigations worked, how evidence spoke, how justice was supposed to function. That irony alone made the story darker. The person who analyzed criminals in classrooms was now being studied as one. If you're finding yourself pulled into this story already, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, not for entertainment, but because stories like this deserve to be followed carefully, without noise or distraction. What comes next matters. Because this case isn't just about how 4 lives were taken. It's about what happens after the headlines fade. About punishment, consequence, and the unsettling reality that sometimes the most severe sentence isn't death at all. This is where the hidden verdict begins.
hereby sentence Mr. Kohberger as follows. On count 1, burglary, 10 years fixed, 0 years indeterminate. I also impose a fine of $50,000. Count 2, first-degree murder of Madison Mogan. I sentence the defendant to a fixed term of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, a fine of $50,000, and a civil penalty of $5,000 payable to the family of the victim. On count 3, for first-degree murder of Kaylee Gonsalves, I sentence the defendant to a fixed term of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, a fine of $50,000, and a civil penalty of $5,000 payable to the victim of the family, or to the family of the victim, pardon me. On count 4, for the first-degree murder of Xana Kernodle, I sentence the defendant to a fixed term of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, a fine of $50,000, and a civil penalty of $5,000 payable to the family of the victim. I sentence the defendant to a fixed term of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, a fine of $50,000, and a civil penalty of $5,000 payable to the family of the victim. The sentences on counts 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 shall run consecutively to one another. Restitution will be left open for 60 days. Defendant will be required to submit a DNA sample and a right thumb print impression to the Department of Corrections and comply with the DNA Database Act. I remand the defendant to the custody of the Idaho State Board of Corrections for to be imprisoned in an appropriate facility and execution of the sentence where he will remain until he dies.
A hollow vessel, something less than human. A body without empathy, without remorse. He chose destruction. He chose evil. He feels nothing.
The investigation didn't explode into the public eye all at once. It moved quietly, deliberately, almost patiently, as if every step was being measured. While the town waited and fear lingered in the air, investigators began reconstructing a timeline built not on rumors, but on patterns. A vehicle seen near the house. Movements that didn't belong. Small details that most people would overlook, but which, when placed together, began to form something unsettlingly clear. Surveillance cameras became silent witnesses. A white sedan appeared again and again, circling through the darkness in the hours before the murders. Cell phone data told its own story, a device moving when it shouldn't, going silent at the exact moment 4 lives were being ended, then reappearing as if nothing had happened. These weren't coincidences. They were choices. And choices leave trails. The name Bryan Kohberger resurfaced, this time no longer as speculation, but as a focus. A graduate student in criminology. A man who studied offenders, who understood forensic evidence, who knew how police think. That knowledge should have been a shield against suspicion. Instead, it became a spotlight. Investigators didn't rush. They watched. They compared. They waited for the evidence to speak for itself. If stories like this matter to you, stories that unfold slowly, revealing truth piece by piece, consider sharing this video with someone who follows true crime. Not to spread fear, but to remember that justice is built on attention to detail. Then came the arrest. Not dramatic. Not chaotic. Just the quiet end of freedom. In another state, far from the crime scene, Bryan Kohberger was taken into custody. The net had closed. And as he stood on the other side of the law, the question was no longer who did it, but what would justice demand in return. By the time the case reached the courtroom, the outcome felt almost predetermined in the public mind. For lives had been taken in a way that shook the nation, and many believed there was only one sentence that could balance the scale. The death penalty loomed over the proceedings like a shadow, unspoken but ever present. For the families of the victims, justice wasn't abstract, it was deeply personal, heavy with grief that no verdict could undo. As evidence was laid out, the room grew quieter. Each detail carried weight, not just the physical evidence, but the story it told, of planning, of movement, of decisions made in the dark. Outside the courtroom, people waited for finality, for an ending that would feel definitive. Death, to many, seemed like the only answer strong enough to match the crime. Then came the turn no one fully expected. The sentence would not be death. Instead, Bryan Kohberger would spend the rest of his life behind bars, with no chance of release. Life without parole. A punishment that, at first, sounded almost merciful to some, and unbearable to others. The courtroom didn't erupt. It fell into a deeper kind of silence. One that carried confusion, anger, and an uneasy sense of incompleteness. If this moment makes you pause, if it forces you to question what justice truly means, take a second to like this video. Not as agreement, but as acknowledgement of how complex these verdicts really are. Because for some, death is an ending. A final escape. But life without parole offers no such release. It stretches punishment across decades, across every waking moment. And as the judge spoke those words, a new realization settled in. This sentence wasn't about how Bryan Kohberger would die. It was about how he would be forced to live. Life without parole sounds simple when spoken aloud, but its reality is far more severe. It is waking up every day in the same place, under the same walls, knowing there will be no final date circled on a calendar. No countdown. No moment when the door opens for the last time. Time doesn't move forward in prison, it presses down. Days blend into years, and years stretch into something endless. For someone like Bryan Kohberger, the punishment carries a deeper weight. This is a man who studied criminal behavior, who analyzed motives, impulses, and the psychology of confinement. Now, he must live inside the very system he once examined from a distance. Every routine, every rule, every locked door becomes a lesson he can never escape. There is no anonymity in this kind of sentence. His name, his crime, his choices follow him into every cell, every silent hour. There is no audience in prison. No courtroom, no cameras, no arguments left to make. Just reflection, whether he wants it or not. The world outside will continue without him. New students will walk the same streets. New memories will be made in a town that once held its breath. And he will remain frozen in the moment everything ended. If you value true crime stories that focus on consequences rather than spectacle, consider subscribing to this channel. Here, the goal isn't to glorify darkness, but to understand the weight of justice when it finally lands. Because death ends suffering. Life without parole preserves it. It forces a person to exist with the full knowledge of what they've done, every single day, without relief. And for some crimes, that ongoing reckoning is the harshest verdict of all. When the courtroom finally emptied, what remained wasn't closure, it was absence. For lives reduced to photographs, memories, and the echo of what should have been. Madison. Kaylee. Xana. Ethan. Names that mattered long before they became headlines. Futures interrupted in a way no sentence can ever repair. While one man was condemned to live behind concrete walls, the people who loved those students were sentenced to remember. Bryan Kohberger will wake up every morning in a place where time has no meaning beyond survival. He will grow older there. Quieter. Forgotten by a world that slowly moves on. His punishment isn't marked by a date or an ending, but by permanence. No redemption arc. No second chance. Just years stacked on top of one another, each one a reminder that freedom is something he will never touch again. And yet, the true weight of this story doesn't rest with him. It rests with the silence left behind. Empty rooms. Unanswered phones. Chairs that will never be filled again. Justice, in its coldest form, didn't bring anyone back, it only ensured that the person responsible would never walk free. Bryan Kohberger didn't get the death penalty. He got something worse. A lifetime to sit with his actions while the world continues without him. A verdict that doesn't end suffering, but stretches it across decades. If this story made you reflect, not just react, take a moment to like, share, and leave your thoughts in the comments. These conversations matter. And if you want more stories that look beyond the headlines and into the consequences, subscribe to The Hidden Verdict. Because some sentences don't end with death. They echo forever.